this week I want to talk about gardens and being in the city and how that shaped the landscape of Hamilton. Come to this because I've been talking about the Hermitage ruins for the last several weeks, and good news, the Permits Committee actually rejected the Hamilton Conservation Authority's proposal to demolish most of the Hermitage. They wanted to reduce it down to 3 feet, really only 3 feet, with a little bit higher around the main entrance. That was rejected. Now it goes to the Heritage Committee. Now be, I think, around late July. So that's good news. So this and so when I was talking about that, I was talking also about the fact that the Hermitage ruins, when you come upon it, you really get a sense of what being out in the woods was, being connected to the land, being connected to the seasons, and that's something that really inspires you, much so than even here at Dundurn Castle, which is where I am. I'm standing in front of the garden vegetable area of the estate, and so I wanted to pick up on that theme of being connected to the land and connected to the seasons by talking about the fact that even Hamilton, if you were living in Hamilton in the 19th century, almost every place had a vegetable garden, and the landscape, people took advantage of the landscape and also shaped the landscape because of that. First example of that is Corktown. In the early days, in the 1830s and 1840s, one of the reasons Corktown was so desirable, other than the fact that the rivers that ran through, the creeks and streams that ran through Corktown made it not a very good area for large-scale farming. But what it did make good use for is small vegetable patches. So when the Irish came in and started setting up shop, coming for construction projects like building the large estates like Dundurn Castle, the canal through the beach strip, the canal through the York Boulevard here, and into Cootes Paradise going out to Dundas, and then eventually the Welland Canal. So the men had work in the area, and so this formed a really nice base of operation. Sorry, I hit the camera. A really nice base of operation. So they set up their homes here, mostly rented, but some people were well enough off to own some homes. And then, because the area was still very much open in the 1830s and 1840s, people were set up sometimes very substantial gardens and vegetable patches, and then sell the produce out of their front living rooms. It became such a popular way of making some extra money that the city required permits for doing this sort of things. There was other ventures too, cutting your hair and that sort of thing. Sometimes little private bars and so forth. People would also make their own spirits, that sort of thing, and sell that out of their front living rooms. But nevertheless, one of the more popular ones was actually selling produce, and so because the landscape was hilly enough and not suitable for large farming, and folks with more money preferred to live elsewhere in Hamilton for much of the period of Hamilton's history, this left an opening for the Irish to come in, settle down, and actually supplement their incomes. Their incomes, just as an aside, their incomes really came from three sources. The men were working on construction sites like the canals and building estates and so forth. The daughters, the young daughters, since they were old enough to leave home, were working on the estates within Hamilton, many of the large estates, Dundurn Castle, other places in Hamilton, and that would supplement the income. The wives would be at home and maintain the home, but also then supplement their income where they can, from sewing to and as I said, to growing vegetables that they could sell at either where the Haymarket, which was that's where the GO station is now, on Hunter Street. That was the Haymarket, and really where the Haymarket comes from was, it actually was a market. That was the first market in Hamilton. Hamilton lost out in his rivalry with other landowners and speculators in Hamilton at City Hall, and the market eventually got shifted down to James and Market Street, which is now James and York Boulevard. And so when that happened, and the swamps that were the bogs that were located at Hunter and James and Barton and James, when they were drained and the road was extended all the way up to the mountain, then there was more commerce. Farmers were able to bring produce down from up the mountain, down James Street, down to the market, and produce could also come up from the harbor, and other pigs and stock and all that sort of thing could come. And the James Street York Boulevard location became the dominant marketplace in Hamilton. The old market at Hunter and John, that then became a Haymarket. People would scavenge the side of the mountain for firewood. They would sell it down there. Hay would be brought in from other areas and sold there. So it became sort of a basic, the basic market. So the old Irish market, which essentially is what that market was, eventually lost out to the main market on James Street. So that was one aspect of how people were very attached to the land, very, very aware of the growing seasons and how that worked out. The other aspect to that is, even if you were not in that area, you had a home down on Barton and James, or Mary Street, or my family was on Elgin Street, or Catherine Street, and those areas in the old inner part of the city. If you notice, the lots are, while they're very narrow, are actually very long, and there was alleyways at the back of those, and back of most of those areas, and now they're all filled with extensions onto homes. The homes used to be only 1 or 2 room single-story buildings. Some more prosperous had a half story or even 2 stories if they're very well off. And so, and then when you go there now, what you see is layer upon layer of additions that have been added on over 100 years. But in the early days, in the 19th century, most of that backyard was empty or available for growing. Now at the back, at the very back, by the alleyway at the back, you would have the outhouse. And this is based on how vegetable gardens were designed in England and in Virginia, in the southern states. There was a very rational way of laying out the gardens. So at the back, you would have around the outhouse, you would have fragrant plants, sometimes herbs, mostly fragrant plants around there, and that could be brought into the house to help with providing a better odor to the indoors. And also just outside the door, you would also have fragrant plants, often herbs, so they'd be readily accessible. Now, in the original houses, what you would have is 2 rooms. You would have the front room, which was where people come over and visit. Sometimes that would also serve as the bedroom. Then you would have the kitchen right immediately behind it. If there was a larger house, you would have a half story, then the bedroom would move upstairs, but still basically on the ground floor. You have front room as the sort of living area, and the back room, the kitchen area, as the kitchen area. But really, that's where people spent most of their time, especially in the winter, because that was where all the heat was, that was where the light is. So just outside the back door, leading into the backyard, you would have all your herbs. And that's where, so not some of the herbs had a very strong scent, so that helped with the aromas of all the manure on the street from the horses and the industrial factories, pigs and sometimes even cows. Even though I don't think there was that many cows in the downtown core, out in Corktown maybe, but nevertheless, maybe goats and pigs. So there was a wide range of aromas, including the outhouse at the back of the yard. So you would have very fragrant flowers, some flowers, herbs, and then in between what you do is you would set up the garden, and there was a rationale to what you put based on the seasons, based on the lighting conditions of your backyard. And so that way you were able to supplement your food diet with fresh vegetables that you didn't have to pay for. And if you grew enough of it and it was you had surplus, you could go to the market, but mostly it's for maintaining the family's, supplementing the family's diet. And so even in the middle of the city in the 19th century, you were very attuned to the seasons and the growing of fruits and vegetables and so forth. This is not to underestimate the fact that you had to walk everywhere. Most people didn't own horses. It would be a commercial venture or very well off, and so you walked everywhere. So you're very attuned to weather, not like today where it's basically the distance from the front door to the car, and then from the car to the office. You spent much more outdoors then, and you knew the seasons much more intimately. But sometimes when we think of Hamilton and we think of the city, we don't think of the agricultural seasons and the fact that you would have been very in tune to frost and how much rain you were getting, and that sort of thing, for very practical reasons, because your diet would be very much affected by it, because it would affect what was growing in your garden in the back. Again, as we moved into the 20th century, people became a little bit more prosperous and put additions onto their homes. These backyards filled up with extensions, and while still some have relatively roomy backyards by today's standards, back then that was nothing compared to what they had. So anyhow, that's and there's really not much on this. It's really I've done a lot of research into city gardens in the 19th century and how the landscape of a home on a piece of property was shaped and how it was utilized. And there's not a lot. Like I said, there's diaries and records of people who were in markets in the States, Philadelphia, Virginia, South Carolina, that sort of thing. And then there's the equivalent of that of worker houses in England and how they supplemented their diets. But Canada, I haven't really found that much, and I haven't really found a lot of information for the northern states opposed to the southern states. Once you come up to the northern part of the U.S., this kind of information kind of disappears. There's a really good blog. I think it's called American Garden. I might be mistaken on that. I'll put the link in the description down below. And this is a woman who works out, whose passion is gardens, and she does a lot of interesting writing on gardens and 19th century and the States and that sort of thing, all basically looking at the 17th, 18th, 19th century, and she has really some interesting stuff. So I'll put the link there. It's well worth the read. She's a very good writer, does an excellent job at putting it together. So anyhow, that's my update for this week. Gardens and the inner city in the 19th century and how it shaped the landscape. I hope this is interesting to you. I'm going to talk more about the Irish and Corktown in the future, but for today I just want to get a first kick at